Chapter 7. During the days that followed, the maestro worked on several sketches. He drew on large, fresh sheets of paper, which several times, in frustration, he ripped up only to begin again. Marco helped him, while Piero, Baldo, and I tidied the studio, prepared paper, and furtively looked over Maestro's shoulder every time we passed behind him. He worked feverishly and stopped only to drink the cups of tea and broth that Melania brought to him, or when he doubled up with a groan, clutching his belly. One night, when Donata and I were discussing the effect of backlighting on an interior scene, I heard the maestro's violent cough from a distant corner of the house. I looked down toward the kitchen and saw Melania's candle. My temples began to pound. "Something's wrong," I whispered. "I have to go." I flew down the stairs without saying goodbye to Donato and threw myself head first onto my pallet, certain that my visits to the attic had been discovered. I was lying there panting when Melania called to me in a frightened voice. "Arduino, wake up, boy. The maestro is very ill." I got up and followed her, relieved that my secret was still safe. But why was she calling me to help her? What could I do? We went across the hall and entered the maestro's bedchamber. I shivered. In all the months that I have lived in his house, I had never been in his room. I looked around. There was a tall four-poster bed with a canopy, a trunk with rusted rings and hinges, and a chair with a grimy leather seat. "Melania!" Maestro called out in an anguished voice. Yes, I'm here. Melania!" he repeated. Slowly I moved closer to the bed. The maestro's pale face was surrounded by cobwebs of gray hair. His forehead was beaded with sweat. "Here," Melania said brusquely. She held a rusty pan toward me. I took it, but I didn't act quickly enough. The maestro suddenly sat up, threw his head forward, and vomited. I felt the room spin around me. I was overwhelmed by nausea. "Hold the pan steady!" Melania yelled. "Can't you see that he's making a mess everywhere?" "What do you want me to do?" "What do you think I want you to do? Make sure he vomits in the pan." It wasn't easy. The maestro moved from side to side in his bed, and I could hardly breathe, much less watch what I was doing. Although only minutes had passed, it seemed that I had spent my whole life next to that bed. Melania stripped the soiled blanket from the bed and took the pan from my hands. The maestro was covered only by a thin sheet. "Arduino, you must go for the doctor," she said. "The doctor? Why me? I don't know where he lives, and besides, I'm all wet and dirty," I protested. I thought of all her stories of the dangerous criminals who wandered the streets. "Come with me," she said, and we headed back to the kitchen. She set the pan on the floor, then took a rag from a hook near the hearth and began to wipe me off. "You'll have time to wash later," she said, then lowered her voice. "The maestro is very ill. The doctor has got to see him. I'll tell you how to find his house." "What about the other boys?" I asked. "Marco is the oldest. Make him go." "Marco won't go, and he doesn't have to. He has a special contract," she said as we walked down the corridor. "Piero is so delicate that I don't dare send him anywhere, and Baldo, well, Baldo never does anything right." But you are the most intelligent and the most sensible," Melania said, resting her heavy hand on my shoulder. I didn't say anything more, feeling both fear and pride. "Go outside and turn right. Keep going until you get to a square with a statue of St. Francis. There you'll see 3 streets. Take the one on the far left, the narrowest one. The doctor lives in the second house on the right. You'll recognize his door easily because the knocker is in the shape of a fleur de lis. But ask for the doctor. His name is Mattone. Tell him that the maestro is very ill. He'll come running. They're good friends." "But I can't," I stammered. I wasn't sure I was going to be a victim of some vicious murderer. Melania pushed me into the street and yelled, "Go on, run. Can't you see that the maestro is dying? Now hurry." The door slammed behind me. Outside, the frigid air relieved the bitter smell of my clothes and cleared my head. I had to try to forget my crazy fears. "I've got to get the doctor," I thought, "if the maestro dies." As soon as I thought it, I felt rotten and selfish again. Did I care about the maestro's health only in terms of how it would affect my future? This could be my chance to help Donato. But what if the maestro did die because I hadn't brought the doctor? As despicable as he was, I would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. It was a choice between one man's imprisonment and another man's death. Tonight, I would have to follow Melania's instructions. As I made my way down the street, I felt along the wall for a sense of security, touching rough stones, bricks, wooden doors, and moldy bell pulls. The thought of encountering a criminal kept me on edge. A cat jumped from a windowsill as I passed. I stopped and listened so closely to every sound that I thought my head would jump from my shoulders. I continued on. I am the son of Emilio Neri, and I will be a Florentine artist, I said to myself. Repeating those words gave me a sense of courage as I made my way into the night. When the wall ended, I had reached a corner, but the square was dark and I couldn't see any statue. I hesitated and looked around. To my left, I saw a tiny ray of light that shone out of a shutter. It was far away, at the end of a street. I hoped it was the street on the far left that Melania told me to look for. I couldn't see whether there were 2 other streets to the right of it. At that moment, I felt the safest thing was to go toward the light. I left the wall and crossed the square slowly so I wouldn't trip. Just before I reached the other side, I heard a splash and felt cold water fill my shoe. I had stepped in a puddle. The cold water felt as though it would cut through my leg. I stumbled the rest of the way across the square and leaned against a wall to empty my shoe. Why should I have to put up with this? I thought with my anger. My father pays good money for the maestro to teach me to paint, not for me to sleep on the floor and eat terrible food and go out in the middle of the night, frozen and dirty. At least my tears were hot. I thought of running away. I would go as far away as I could and live the way I wanted, on my own, or even at sea with pirates. Anything would be better than this nightmare. A clock somewhere struck 1. I started down the street, still touching the walls as I went along. I paid close attention to the door knockers as I passed each building. I didn't want to pass the doctor's house. 1 door, 2 doors, an empty niche, and finally another door. Anxiously, I peered at the knocker. It was in the shape of the fleur de lis, which I had drawn so many times before. Never had it seemed so lovely to me. I knocked 4 times, but no answer. I figured the household was asleep and tried again. This time it worked. I'm coming, I'm coming. It was a woman's voice. The top half of the door opened, and a very sleepy face, topped with a red woolen nightcap, peered out at me. What do you want? Her tone was understandably gruff. My maestro is very ill. He needs Dr. Mentone, I answered. Who is your maestro? Cosimo di Forli. Wait here, said the woman, and she shut the door. Before long, the door opened again, and a tall, thin man wrapped in a long cloak stepped out. What's wrong with Cosimo? He asked. I don't know, sir. He's been vomiting. His stomach hurts. He coughs a lot. The doctor went back inside to get a lantern. When he returned, we started back toward the maestro's house. We walked in silence, though the doctor kept a brisk pace which, despite my frozen feet, I managed to keep up with. As we passed through the square, by the light of the lantern, I could see the statue of St. Francis that I had missed on my way there. Finally, we reached the house. The doctor knocked firmly on the door. It creaked open in the cold, and Melania let us in, talking all the while. Thank you so much for coming, doctor. The maestro has been ill for some time, but he refuses to take care of himself. I've wanted to call for you many times, but he's never let me. You know he's as stubborn as a mule. They went into the bedroom, and I stayed in the kitchen by the fire that Melania had stirred up from the embers. I stared into the flames. I was stiff from the cold. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, but Melania's voice interrupted my thoughts. What are you doing so close to the fire? Are you trying to burn the house down? That's just what we need. I looked at her. She was red and out of breath. Where is the doctor? I asked. He left a few minutes ago. How long had I been standing there? What's wrong with the maestro? Well, Dr. Matone says the maestro's stomach is blocked and half rotten. He'll have to stay in bed and eat lots of vegetables for a while. As she looked at me, her expression became sweeter. You poor boy, you're wet and dirty. Wait just a moment. Melania put a pot of water on the stove and then went into the laundry. She emerged with a large wooden tub and a block of soap. She filled the tub partway with cold water, then we sat together at the kitchen table, waiting for the pot of water to boil. When it did, she poured it into the tub, filling it a few more inches. Then she cut off a small slab of soap from the block and handed it to me. Come on, take off those dirty rags and get in. I'll get you some clean clothes. The warm bath was delicious. I had gone out into the night, done what I was supposed to do, and returned safely. For me, that was the real triumph, and a bath was my reward. A little while later, Melania returned with clean clothes for me. You've been a good lad. I knew I could count on you. I have had a lot of experience with boys. You are one of the good ones. You deserve a better life than this nest of misery and envy. She sighed as she combed out my hair. If I could choose, it's hard to be born a woman and a servant. Always obeying, even when the person who gives you orders is mean and miserable. Always silent, even when you don't agree. Bearing everything. everything. Milani had never talked like this to me, and I was moved by her words. But before I could say anything, the maestro's anguished voice rang out from his room, and Melania was away down the hall again.